Blog Talk Radio.
There is a mystery lurking the forested areas of the world. Many have seen something, but what is it? Are they seeing known animals? They claim they walk upright, like a human. There are so many eyewitnesses. Can they all be wrong? Is someone just playing a trick on people? Or is it possible a large bipedal being could exist in the forests of the world? You have a decision to make. Do you believe it exists? These are the topics we discuss on Sasquatch Watch Radio. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Sasquatch Watch Radio. Today is August 13th, 2013, and we have a great show for you tonight. Before we bring our great guest on the show, first I need to introduce our fabulous co-host, the Creature Seeker.
Hey, Billy, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm enjoying the nice weather we're having this last stretch here.
Oh, you're actually having nice weather.
Well, it's nice compared to that torrential downpour we had that came before it. It was
thanks for
kind of nice
down
to have blue sky.
Thanks for sending it down this way. Appreciate that a lot.
Well, I gotta share, Billy.
Yeah, I noticed. I guess you can share that, but you won't share your steak.
No, that's don't get between me and my steak, Billy.
Well, some of those steaks, you could cut in half and share very easily.
You could share them, right? Yeah, you're right. You could. It's not gonna happen though. Speaking of steak, Billy, our guest tonight is Stan Gordon, and rumor has it that he could give me a run for my money when it comes to steak eating.
Well, that sounds like we're going to have a steak eating contest.
Well, you could very well see that at a future conference.
Oh my gosh, oh wow! I got to get my tickets.
So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Stan Gordon to the show. Hey, Stan, how you doing?
Good evening, guys. We're doing fine. Appreciate you having me on the program tonight.
Well, thanks for coming on the program. It was either you or Eric Altman, and I think we made a good decision.
Eric will probably be calling in here really shortly.
Eric doesn't listen to the show. That's why I bust his chops.
Don't let him fool you, Stan. He listens to the archive every morning on the way to work.
That's a good thing.
So Stan, you do a lot with UFOs, but I also know that you've done some Bigfoot investigations. And can you tell us how you got into Bigfoot research?
Well, it's actually going way back to 1959 when I was 10 years old. And how it all began, my birthday's during the Halloween season. And on my 10th birthday, my parents gave me a new radio, and I was tuned around the AM radio dial that night. And because of Halloween, there was some radio talk shows talking about things that went bump in the night, from strange creatures to flying saucers to haunted houses. And I was very curious as a 10-year-old, and I was interested in science. And as soon as I heard those shows, I began to make a lot of trips to the local Greensburg library and read whatever books they had on these topics. And I began to scrutinize the newspapers. If I saw stories on strange things, I would cut them out and make scrapbooks. And if an article appeared in the local papers where somebody claimed to have seen something unusual, I called them on the phone and talked to them about what they saw, and I kept records of it. And my interest continued over the years. And I was 16 when the Kecksburg UFO incident happened, about 12 miles from my house in December of 1965. And I was 16 again at that time. And I got involved in that case the night it happened, but been working on it ever since. And it was after that incident I began to go out into the field to do first-hand research on UFOs and other phenomena. And in 1969, I decided to set up a public hotline for the public to report local UFO incidents, and I began to make contact with the local police and the news media. And, of course, back in those days, there was a great amount of ridicule dealing with these subjects, but I tried to handle it very seriously and scientifically as best as I could. And I made them aware that if they got calls, even if they weren't going to follow up on it, if they at least let the people know I was around and interested, I would appreciate they would get in contact with me. Well, it was a matter of weeks.
Dan,
yeah.
You were 16 at the time?
I'm sorry?
You were 16 during the Kecksburg incident?
Yes.
Wow. I thought you were in your 40s back then. What's going on?
Okay, so it'll be 54 years I've been doing this research this year.
Wow.
And but anyhow, as this hotline began to get known out there, I was inundated with reports. And I realized that this was far more than I could handle on my own. There was all kind of reports of all kind of phenomena coming in, and I realized I needed scientists and research people who could go out there and really follow up and investigate these cases. So that was my goal. I wanted to set up a volunteer group of research people who could respond quickly to these cases, and that's what I did. So in 1970, I founded the first of 3 volunteer research groups that would be active from basically 1970s to 1993. I had 3 different groups. The first one was called the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group, and it was quite amazing that the people we were able to get involved, and most of them did anonymously because of their positions. But I had a lot of scientific people working for Alcoa, Westinghouse, Gulf Research in Pittsburgh, from some of the colleges around the area. I had some major companies that donated their analytical facilities to us if we got any samples we need tested. And with my electronics background, I set up a very involved communication center in my home. I set up a 2-way radio dispatch system so we could dispatch some of the investigators out to the scene. So we started this small group locally here in Westmoreland County, about 40 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, and it began to gradually expand into the Pittsburgh area. By 1973, the group was getting reports from all over the state of Pennsylvania, and surprisingly, we were getting a lot of reports forwarded to us from the police departments and the news media. And that was really quite interesting to us. And as this huge outbreak of incidents happened in 1973 and 1974, luckily the group was already well activated. We are set up quite well, and we were able to respond to these incidents around the clock. And it was an amazing time to live through. And if you want to get into some of those events, we can talk about that. That was the early days and probably some of the most amazing times in history anywhere in the world of what was going on with Bigfoot and UFOs and other phenomena.
Wow, that's interesting. I tell you, Stan, that's a lot of years under your belt. That's wow, 50-some years. And I'm very interested in the group that you. I mean that is phenomenal to have a group and everybody have 2-way radios back in the time. And
we couldn't do it everybody, but we had quite a number of people, at least in this region, that were part of the system. And but we had a really good network set up. And so in other parts of the state, we of course back then there was no internet and no cell phones. And things were a lot different, but we were very active. We had many cases. We had teams out there within minutes to hours after the incidents happened, and that's why we could document this information, gather so much data. And, in all the years I've been doing this now, I have still personally never seen a UFO or a Bigfoot. Interviewed thousands of people who have seen UFOs and hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses. I've seen lots of evidence at the scene. We've gathered a lot of materials and had a lot of analysis done on various materials that we found, but I've never personally seen one myself.
Now, here's the real question. Stan. How many reports of Bigfoot turned out to be just, people mistaking Dave Rupert for a Bigfoot? How many of those did you get?
Well, whenever I do talk shows, I always talk about the fact that one thing I learned from the day I began to go out and do field investigation is still the same today. Many things initially sound strange and unusual, but when you track them down and investigate them, generally a high percentage of reports are determined to be either natural or man-made in origin. There's a lot of misidentifications out there. With UFO sightings, for example, you got bright planets and stars, you got bright meteors, you got reentry of space debris. Now we got to deal with remote control helicopters and aircraft and Chinese lanterns people are launching now. So a lot of things you can track down. With Bigfoot, there have been many misidentifications from bear to large shaggy dogs to different things that people just misinterpreted being something that it wasn't. And so you do get a lot of those reports, but I can tell you, over the years, so many of the cases I was involved with, many were daylight sightings. Many were cases where people were well within 50 feet of the creatures. And in some cases, there were multiple creatures. And a lot of the cases, especially back in the early days, back in the 70s and 80s, there was physical residue, physical evidence at the scene. I mean, we get teams out there, there'll sometimes be trails of footprints, or there'll be indication of a very strong physical a presence that was there, that trees ripped out of the ground, trees snapped. The most interesting thing that we saw, and even some of the police officers who responded in some cases, was the animal reactions. You can fake anything. People can be fooled. The animals can't. And something was reoccurring in a lot of the cases we looked into over the years. Again, very common, especially in the 70s, because once again, we were there soon after the events happened, and this was a recurring fact that kept coming up to us from the people on the properties they had never seen before. What even the most vicious dogs, when these creatures were in the distance, the dogs would go crazy, bark and just carry on. But when these creatures were physically close to even the most ferocious dogs, they would just be paralyzed. They wouldn't move, they wouldn't bark, they would shake, they would cower, they would hide in their pens wherever they could. They sometimes wouldn't recover for hours. Sometimes days later, they wouldn't even eat properly. And even though there was responses in other animals such as horses and cattle and cats and things like that, it was very, very common with dogs for whatever reason.
And coincidentally, that sounds like my reaction to vegetables, Stan.
What can I say? But I know you don't have a reaction like that when you're eating steak.
No.
I told you about the pictures thing, Stan.
I heard about that. You got this challenge with me now for about 2 years, so we're going to have to meet one of these days and do it.
I ate that 32-ounce steak plus the crab legs plus the what was it, chocolate pie? Yeah, it was.
You are the man, that's all I can say.
Yeah, imagine that. Chocolate pie. Imagine that.
I don't know where you're getting at, Billy.
I tell you what, he's very proud of what he eats, that's for sure. We had our first question from the chat room from Jeremy James. And Stan, his question is, so what do you think the connection between Sasquatch and Bigfoot is?
Between Sasquatch and Bigfoot?
Yeah, that's his question.
Well, of course, Sasquatch is the name. There's a lot of regional and national names, and they appear to, as far as I'm aware, Sasquatch is just a localized name in, up in the Pacific Northwest and up in Canada and those areas, and it's very typical description of what we're getting here in Pennsylvania and throughout the East Coast and other parts of the country, and of course there are very similar type of things seen throughout the world. My question is, and we didn't get into some of the really intriguing, really odd things that we discovered during our investigations, and I guess the question might be, what is Bigfoot? And again, when I got involved in this back in the early days, and I started looking into Bigfoot casing in Pennsylvania in the late 1960s. And there had always been a history, of course, of Bigfoot activity here, going back to the Native Americans and also the newspaper accounts from the 1800s. So it's something that had been going on for quite a while. And I had heard reports in the 60s around the area on occasion. It wasn't that well known. Some of the early reports I was investigating was down around what they call Lowburn and West Newton, down along the Sulphur Creeks down there, where people had seen a large, white, hairy creature. And on occasion, we still get reports of gray ones or like dirty white ones, but not as common as the dark-haired creatures. And but anyhow, I've always went in this open-mindedly, and I've always felt that if these things are real, and now after so many years of the hundreds of people I've interviewed, very credible people, from police officers and farmers and doctors and lawyers and children and all kind of people who have no reason to make up this story. 95% of the people I talked to want no publicity. In fact, many people had life-changing experiences, and they're not out to gain any type of publicity whatsoever. And I always felt that we're probably dealing with some type of unknown primate. But some of the cases we came up with really proposed to us the fact that there's some very strange things out there we don't have answers for. And this goes back to the outbreak of 1973 into 1974, which if you want to get into that, we can do that.
Yeah, and I was pretty certain that Jeremy James meant what I thought he meant, and I asked his question like he typed it, but he I didn't want to say this, but I figured that's what he meant, but he just clarified if you think there's a correlation between UFOs and Bigfoot.
Yeah, I kind of felt that's what he probably was going to ask.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got to go back in history a little bit. So, here's this major event in 1973. This will take a few minutes just to talk. We could talk for days and days about this outbreak, and that's why I wrote the book Silent Invasion, that go into the great detail of all the weird things that happened during that time period. And anyhow, so we had our first group, as I said, established at that time, and all these reports started coming in. It all began in August the 7th of 1973 when I received a phone call from a relative of a person who told me something odd had happened to this fellow. He lived in a rural area outside of Greensburg, and it was a warm evening. It was actually July 31st. I didn't get the call until a week later. And the guy was shaving that night in his bathroom. It was a warm night. He shaves early because he gets up early to go to work, and everything was normal. Began to smell this funny odor. He said it was like rotten cucumber. And he turns around to look in the window. There's a screen in the window, and the window's open. And there in front of the screen, these two huge glowing red eyes. But the window's 8 feet off the ground. So he goes running to the other room and calls some of his relatives. They come out. They smell the odor. Whatever was there was gone. They had several dogs outside. The dogs weren't barking, which they thought was odd, because those dogs bark when there's anybody around that shouldn't be. And anyhow, he had some physical problems afterwards, maybe connected with that. Went to the hospital. So I got the call when he got out of the hospital from the relative. I went out to interview him that day. He's still very shook up. And as I'm interviewing him, I find out from the family that a number of young local boys had several weeks before had taken a shortcut over to the local mall, the old Greengate Mall at the time, and there was a lot of woods and brush around there at the time. They heard this commotion, and they thought it was a deer. They started throwing some rocks in to scare the deer out. Instead of a deer, here comes this 7-8 foot tall, hair-covered creature with long arms swinging, crossing the road, going up behind the house. So I got to interview some of the boys, and they all told me the same similar story. I asked the people on the property if it was all right if I go up and look around, and a few of the boys wanted to know if they could follow me up the hill, and they came with me. And we're up here for quite a while. The ground conditions were not really good up there, and I'm looking around for quite a while, and I'm about ready to leave when I happen to look down to see the strangest footprint I'd ever seen. And the kids come over, and they're just gasping, like, what could make a footprint like that? It's 13 inches long and 8 inches wide, and clearly three-toed. You guys have probably seen the cast I have. I've taken around to some of the conferences I'm at. And I got on the radio. I called one of my assistants. He came out, and we took photographs and measurements, made a cast. And while we're out in the field, we get a radio call that one of our investigators up almost by the Ohio line up in Beaver County that morning had been investigating a case with something 9 feet tall, was looking in a window, and the police found large footprints in the area. So here's the beginning of this major outbreak of Bigfoot sightings. And I should tell you that prior to that, we have been inundated with UFO sightings going on all over the state. It started January 1st, was continuing all year long, hundreds and hundreds of UFO cases. These were not just lights in the sky in many cases, but these were large structured craft that were seen close to the ground and very low, chasing cars, hovering over roadways, landing reports. Just that in itself was amazing. So now we're getting into this Bigfoot outbreak. It begins. And it starts out in southwestern Pennsylvania, but it's expanding into numerous other counties and into other parts of the state. And this goes on not for days, but it goes on to weeks and months into 1974. It was amazing what was going on. I mean, we had 2 phone lines set up at my house for reports. There were weeks that the phones would keep going out of order because they couldn't handle all the calls coming in. We had people manning our phones and our radio systems 24 hours a day for weeks as this was taking place. And we had teams out there day and night. We were all doing this around our jobs, but we were responding to all these incidents as they were coming in. So in many cases, we were on the scene within minutes or hours after it occurred. And so all these Bigfoot reports are coming in, and in some cases there were multiple creatures. In some cases, people actually physically 5 to 10 feet away from these creatures, like driving their car by these creatures, getting detailed reports, just so many amazing events. So as all this is unfolding, we're thinking, we apparently are dealing with some type of unknown primate. Well, then some rather strange reports begin to surface. And again, you got to remember, these are coming from widespread areas, from the general public, many people calling the police initially, who are scared to death, don't believe in this stuff. Most of these were people who had no interest, especially back in those days with UFOs and Bigfoot, and they're telling us some odd stories. So one of the first reports we get comes from a rural area outside of Greensburg. It's a wife of a prominent doctor. She sees this large boomerang-shaped object hovering low over the area and smells this very unusual sulfur odor at the same time. And a few hours later, she hears gunshots right down the street and finds out later that her neighbor went outside to see what was bothering the dog, to see this big, hairy Bigfoot creature chasing after the dog, and he gets his gun and starts shooting this thing as it runs off into the woods. So, kind of interesting, a UFO sighting and a Bigfoot a few hours later in the same area. Well, we began to see this pattern that was developing where you would have a UFO sighting in a certain area, and within minutes to hours, you'd have a Bigfoot sighting, or vice versa. And then the reports got more and more intriguing. September 27th up in Beaver County, there's 2 young women waiting for a friend out in the country to pick them up to go somewhere. They see this large, white hairy creature walking across the road towards this wooded area. But just the creature alone was fascinating enough to see. But in one of its hand, it's carrying a small, glowing sphere of light. And it's going down into the woods. So they run and tell the father, who owns the property, one girl. He goes down into the woods, and while he's down there, this object comes across the sky and projects this beam of light down into the woods. So these reports keep continuing, and again, it's from far off, widely separated areas, and I'm just touching on a few of the reports. But then we had that classic case. I mean, we could talk for hours just about this incident. It's so weird and strange. That's why I have mentioned the whole thing in when I wrote the Solid Invasion book. It's very, very detailed and very unusual. But just to cover it really briefly, October 25th, 1973. There had been a lot of UFO sightings come in from around the state during that 24-hour period. At about 10:30 that night, I get a call from the state police barracks up in Uniontown from a trooper who said he just came back from investigating this multiple witness UFO landing with 2 Bigfoot creatures in the pasture in the field at the same time. And he himself seemed a little nervous, and he said, there's a good chance there's something still up here in the pasture. You need to get a team up here right away. One of the key witnesses was also at the barracks. I was able to talk with him. He was extremely shook up and very detailed accounts. And it was enough for us to realize that, yeah, we need to get up there as soon as we can. So it's already late at night. We check our radiation equipment out. We check our equipment out. We gather a team, and it's quite a distance away, but we got up there in the early morning hours. And we met the key witness and his father. This trooper we didn't see till I believe it was the next day because he had to go back to work and get to sleep for a short time and get up again early next morning. And anyhow, what we found out was about 15 people in this rural community outside of Uniontown. About 9 o'clock that night, they see this object about as big as a barn. It's bright red sphere of light. It's about 100 feet up in the air, and it's slowly moving down towards the pasture. So the farmer's son and his wife were visiting, came out to visit his dad at his farm where this was taking place at the father's farm. They're going down the farm lane, and they see this thing, and they go over to a neighbor's house to get a different vantage point of it. And all these people around the area watch this thing slowly coming down. So this fella, who's quite a big fella, he and two young boys decide they're going to go up to see what's going on up there. So he stops over his dad's farm. He grabs a .30-06 and grabs a handful of ammunition, which include 2 tracers and some live ammo. So they proceed down with the truck towards the pasture. Now, in the distance, the dogs are going nuts. They also hear like this high-pitched whining sound and also like baby crying sounds, and they're all getting louder as they get closer towards the pasture. So they angle their truck on the hill with the lights on so they can see the way up, and they notice it looks like the headlights are dimming as though they're draining a power, which they had never had happen before. So they climb up to the top of the pasture. When they get up there, they're all in amazement. Because here, about 250 feet away, this object is right on the ground or just above it. And now it's not a whole sphere. It's like a hemisphere. It's like a half a sphere. It's like a bright white dome. And it's about 100 feet or more in diameter, and it's illuminating the whole field, the whole area. And it's making that high-pitched whirling sound. And they can't believe what they're seeing. And they're trying to figure out what is this thing. So as they're watching this thing, their attention is drawn about 75 feet away to a barbed wire fence. Because along that barbed wire fence, there's these 2 tall figures, one behind the other, that are slowly moving in their direction. And their first thought is, well, they got to be bear. I mean, what else could these things be? Well, as they're watching, they're realizing these things are much more unusual because the fence post is 6 feet tall, and the biggest one in front, at least 8 foot tall, the one behind is 7 feet tall. They're covered with kind of grayish, brownish hair, long hair hanging down from the body. Arms are down almost to the ground. They're covered with, again, the long, dark, matted hair. They have glowing green eyes. There's this funny smell in there, some like burning rubber, they said, and these things are walking one behind the other. And finally, the one boy yells, shoot him, and the one boy is really upset. He runs out of the field. He's so scared. The guy finally takes a shot, and it's a tracer, so he just had an instant flash of light. So he fires one tracer. He fires a second tracer. When he fires that second tracer, the largest of the 2 creatures reaches out as though to grab that tracer, and it leaves out like this loud baby crying sound, and when it reaches out to grab it, the object in the field suddenly just vanishes and disappears. It doesn't take off. It's just gone. The sound goes out, all the glowing area, the whole illumination in the area has disappeared. It's gone. The creatures at that point turn around and slowly start walking back, one behind the other, back towards the woods where they came from. So the guy starts firing live ammo right into it. He said, look, I've been hunting for years. He always told me, he said, I never forgot how those things just stared at him with those glowing green eyes, just kept looking, especially the biggest one, and he kept shooting right into it. He said, oh, I know I hit that thing. There's no doubt I hit it, but they seem not to even feel the impacts. And so they go running back out of the woods. They run to their truck, and they go to the farmhouse and tell the family what happened. They take them to a neighbor's, and they call the state police. So about 45 minutes later, the trooper arrives, and he said, I'm here to investigate the saucer report. And the guy said, look, just forget about it. You know, you're going to think I'm crazy. And the trooper makes the kind of comment like, we had a report of 2 similar creatures up on the mountain last night. I have to go investigate the report. So they go up in the troop car, and what the trooper told me was when they got up to the area, the location where the object had been on the ground was now self-luminescent glowing about 100 to 150 feet in diameter. The animals, the farm animals under one gun who were around it, he said it was bright enough that if he had a newspaper, he could have sat down within that area and read the newspaper from the light coming off. And anyhow, there was a lot more to the story. It gets even stranger and stranger. And anyhow, they go back to the barracks. When they go back to the barracks, both the trooper and the witness are separately taken to two different rooms, and they're both separately interviewed. And after that, the trooper calls me, and from that point, we get up to the area. We checked in for radiation, All the levels were normal at that point. When we got there, the area was no longer glowing. The farm animal still wouldn't go anywhere near it, but it was a very, very involved case, and there was a lot of investigation done. And it was the case that made us aware that there is no doubt whatsoever there's more to the phenomenon here than we understand and have the answers for. I don't have the answers or why these things happen. And there were other cases, too, and I can tell you one that's really, really strange on top of that. Because the question came to mind back then, as it has done in many years since then, is, you've got all these Bigfoot reports. They're seen all over the country. They're seen in something similar seen in other countries. And yet, we have very little physical evidence. I mean, you get some tracks, you get some possible hair samples. By now, if this was a normal animal, we should have more physical evidence. We should have had a body by now. Somebody should have hit one with a car. Somebody should have found a dead one. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think more and more people in the field are beginning to ask the same question. And I had to ask this question, like, why don't we have more physical evidence that these are normal animals? And then we had some extremely weird cases which suggested to us, whether we liked it or not, that there was some evidence that at least some of these things may not be normal flesh and blood animals. And if you want to get into that, we can get into that as well.
I'll tell you what, that is one interesting story. That is amazing. It sounds like
and that's only part of the story. You haven't even heard the weirdest part yet, but it's it's so strange. It's even for me to talk about it so many years later. It's something that I still have to deal with.
Yeah, well, you've got a photographic memory. I can't remember what I did yesterday, so.
I have a photographic memory too, but too bad nothing ever seems to develop.
Yeah, I know you. However, you never forget that big steak you talked about.
It always comes back to the steak, doesn't it?
Yeah, that image.
You guys are unbelievable.
That image is burnt into his mind. Well,
That's
he's been holding for a little while, so I'll get him on here. Henry May, you're on the air.
Good evening, gentlemen. Oh, and Bruce too.
Hey, HPM.
Oh, well, I wanted to ask Stan a couple of questions. I wanted to ask, first of all, about the Kecksburg case. I'm very interested. I remember seeing the segment on Unsolved Mysteries about it, and I know Stan was on that segment. What exactly, I mean, and I know there was a lot of stuff surrounding government agencies and people taking this craft off, and military telling people, you didn't see this and stuff like that.
Well, once again, Kecksburg is the case. We could spend days talking about Kecksburg, and it was an amazing story. And, I'll give you a good synopsis of it. The date was December 9th, 1965, and it occurred locally about 4:47 p.m., so it's just about getting dark at that time. And the initial reports, how I got involved, just to tell you how I got involved, 16 years old, I was tuning in that night to the major radio station in Pittsburgh, KDKA, because they had a talk show. It's called Contact. And the host at that time, his name was Mike Levine, who's now deceased. And Mike was going to have a guest on the show. His name was Frank Edwards, so you may recognize his name, who was a reporter who had written some books on flying saucers and strange occurrences. So I was tuning in to listen to him. Well, what was very fascinating was the fact that pretty much the entire show focused on this UFO incident, which had just happened a short time before, and they were talking about this brilliant fireball that had been seen from the tip of Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And in the Pittsburgh area that afternoon, the radio, TV stations, police departments were just deluged with reports of this fiery object moving across the Pittsburgh area. And so I'm listening to these reports. They're reading the wire service stories that are just breaking. They're interviewing witnesses, and they're talking about the information that whatever this object was, it apparently fell east of Pittsburgh in Westmoreland County near the little village of Kecksburg. And as the evening went on, it got much more fascinating because reports were coming in that the military was now arriving in a small rural community to search for an unidentified flying object. So what happened was, as this is the major news story now all over the Pittsburgh area, hundreds of people descend on this little farming community that night to try to get a look at this UFO. Well, you have to see the geography of the area. I mean, you've got this narrow little farm lane that is paralleling along this large wooded area. It's dark. All they can see in most cases is lights in the woods. But hundreds of people are jamming over to the top of this hill, which you can see all over the area. Well, what they didn't know that night was the thing actually had fallen way down on the opposite side of the woods, down in the ravine. And, again, so much of what I've learned has been from the years and years of investigations, 48 years of investigation. I'm still getting information on the case that I've learned and put together and find out what exactly happened that night, which we didn't know then. But so you got hundreds of people out there, including the news media. So the news media were even witnesses themselves, because you had all the major newspapers, radio, and TV stations in the area, representatives out on the scene that night, who verified the fact that they saw a military presence. Some of them intervened with some of the military. And some people like Robert Gaddy, who was a reporter for the local Greensburg Tribune Review, he was the main reporter, one of the main reporters on the scene that night. He wanted to get down into the woods, and the authorities wouldn't let him get down. It got to the point where he said, "What if I get down?" He said, "You'll be arrested." And so that's the kind of things we're hearing that night. But anyhow, here's what we now know. And again, a lot of this we learned over years and years from having interviewed hundreds of people independently. And I can tell you, even today, the majority of people involved don't even know each other, because most of them want to remain anonymous. Even though a lot have gone public, multitudes have not. And the reason is this. Many of those witnesses back then were children or teenagers, and they grew up to be police officers and school teachers and CEOs and very credible people. And because of their positions, even today, or what they were, a lot of them don't want to go public and be ridiculed. But it was so amazing to me, after so many years of putting pieces of the puzzle together, how all these people, independent of each other, who didn't know each other, gave me these little details of what they observed and what happened that night that they couldn't have known unless they were there. And that was really credible. But anyhow, what we know is this. After the object fell, and here's this object coming in from the Pittsburgh area, and as it's coming into the air before it fell, this thing is moving relatively slowly. It's making change of direction along its path, and it makes a slow descent where it came in. People who saw it go down said it didn't come down at a high rate of speed, like a reentry of space debris or a meteor coming in, but it came in relatively slowly. And what we now know is that various local people and others later on went down into the woods, and they came across this object, which is described as semi-buried in the ground. It's a large metallic acorn-shaped object. It's kind of an off-gold bronze color. It's about 10 to 12 feet or more in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter, but there's dirt and debris around it, and most of it's under the ground, so they're estimating how big it was. But on the back part of like an acorn, the raised up part they call like the ring area, the bumper area, as one witness calls it, there were these raised up markings that were clearly defined that, as one witness said, who went and tried to find out what they may have been, he said the closest thing he could determine was they looked like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. So anyhow, to make the story short, the military comes in, and according to numerous people, the thing is loaded onto a large military flatbed tractor trailer, which leaves the area about 1 o'clock in the morning. In the summer of 1990, before I did the Unsolved Mysteries show, a man approached me, and I checked his credentials, and very credible witness, and his story is verified by another person that he doesn't know, and he told me that he was a part of the Air Force security team that guarded the object when it came in from Pennsylvania at Lockbourne Air Force Base near Columbus, Ohio. It came in during the early mornings of December the 10th. It came in through an entranceway that's normally not used. They backed the trailer with the tarped object into a hangar, and they set up a security perimeter. They were given a shoot-to-kill order to anybody who approached that hangar without the proper authorization. Now, he told me it wasn't on that crew that long, but he heard that truck didn't stay there that long on the base. It continued on to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base by Fairborn, Ohio. And other witnesses told me exactly what building it went to, how to get there, and possibly even if it's maybe there today, we have no way of getting in it. We don't know, but we know exactly what building they took it to at Wright-Patterson, and it wasn't the famous Anchor 18. So again, where's that today? We really don't know. But it's a fascinating story. There are so many independent stories. And I guess what's really fascinating is the fact that you got so many people independently who told us they saw Air Force and Army, and others told me that they either saw or had contact with NASA personnel. And, of course, the only official document that we've ever found was from the Air Force Project Blue Book report. And it states that the search continued at 2 a.m. and nothing was found, and there are only 3 Air Force personnel on the scene. And that's, by multitudes of witnesses, that just doesn't fit with all the eyewitness accounts of the large military presence that was reported out in the area. And, there's been a lot of speculation, what this thing was. There's still speculation. I'm to the point now where, while we've eliminated a lot of possibilities, I'd say the 2 most likely explanations at this point is, one, it was either a very, very secretive, very sophisticated, for the 1960s, man-made space probe that had some type of reentry control capability, or it's extraterrestrial. Mm-hmm. And I keep an open mind to all possibilities, but something was there that caused the military to respond so quickly, and after 48 years, the government still won't tell the public the truth about what happened that day in 1965.
Wow.
My second question is regarding large humanoid creatures, and I'm not talking about Bigfoot. I'm talking about there was a report on the show Sightings back in the mid-'90s about some large humanoid creatures being seen in Israel. They left large footprints, and then they weren't hair covered or anything like that, but they were large humanoids. Are you familiar with that?
I remember hearing about it. And I know there have been other cases in other parts of the world, similar type of things. There's all kind of mysterious creature reports coming in from all over the world. And here in Pennsylvania, I'm always receiving reports. Last year, if you go to my website, which is stangordon.info, and you review back through a lot of the sighting reports, you'll see on there some incredibly weird cases. And the area of cryptozoology, which I get involved in Pennsylvania, deals with, besides mountain lion reports, which are probably the most normal of these type of things. We know they've been around for years and years, but in Pennsylvania, in this part of the country, they've been declared extinct for many years, but there are multitudes of reports, and people see them year after year. So that's not really that strange. But some of the strange reports are the recurring sightings of Black Panther sightings, which I've had reports, again, even just in the last couple of years, some very detailed sightings, close-range observations by hunters who have seen these animals, which are, of course, not common in this part of the world. Other things what I get involved would be, besides Bigfoot, would be what we call Thunderbird reports, in which there seems to be an increase in reports in the last few years of these huge birds with tremendous wingspans. We're talking 10 to 20 feet wingspans. And those reports have been going on, and we've had some really interesting cases of that even not too long ago. We get all kind of strange creature reports. We had the large humanoid creature with the wings on it, what appear to be wings, up in Butler County in 2011, which was fascinating. So there's all kind of strange creature reports coming in year after year. And if you keep checking my website, I try to get that updated. One of the more recent Thunderbird sightings was down in Derry Township. Now, Derry Township is along the Chestnut Ridge here in Westmoreland County. The Chestnut Ridge is probably one of the most active areas in the country for repeat Bigfoot, UFO sightings, and other phenomena year after year. The Chestnut Ridge is a 100-mile-long mountain range that runs from Preston County, West Virginia, to Westmoreland, Fayette, and Indiana County in southwest Pennsylvania. It has had a long, long history of all kind of weird events. And for whatever reason, Derry Township, which is outside of Latrobe, it's one of the hottest areas in the country for repeat Bigfoot activity. Even in the last few years, we've had reports out in those areas. Why? We just don't know. And anyhow, weird things go on out there all the time. May 17th this year, I interviewed a guy several times. Around between 4 and 5 that afternoon, it's daylight, he was out fishing out at the Loyalhanna Lake, riding his motorcycle, heading towards New Derry, and he comes around the bend, and about 50 feet in front of him is this huge flying creature. It's about 8 to 10 feet above the road, and this guy was really familiar with the birds of Pennsylvania. And he said this thing was dark brown or black, the neck was short, and he only got to see it from the side, but he said the body itself was just huge, but he said the wingspan was amazing, and he said that wingspan easily would have had expanded to over 20 feet or more in length. And he said he got down to the point where it crossed. He was just there in a matter of seconds, and he looked, and it was a very, very thick wooded area, and he looked to where it would have entered, and he couldn't see any sign of it. And he just couldn't understand where something that big could have gone to that thick wooded area without him seeing something, some evidence of it. And I hear this from so many people. You know, you look at all these crypto creatures we get reports of, and I mean historically, from the Mothman reports to all these other scattered reports from the Lizard Man in South Carolina, till you get these localized outbreak of Bigfoot sightings, and then, you know, it gets stranger and stranger when you really look into the cases. For example, sometimes when we get an outbreak, a local outbreak of Bigfoot sightings, we get a local outbreak of Black Panther sightings as well. This phenomena is much more intriguing and much stranger than a lot of people have any idea what we're dealing with. I don't have the answers, but I also have to ask the question of all these strange creatures, and they're seen by credible people. Sometimes you got physical evidence, but these things keep being reported. But just like with Bigfoot, why by now, if these things are normal animals, why don't we have more physical evidence? They seem to suddenly appear and disappear. And there's various theories on this. And all I can say is some of the evidence I've seen with some of the Bigfoot cases suggests that we're dealing with something, for a better term, that's interdimensional. It's in a physical state at times, it leaves physical evidence, and then it's gone. And, you know, as we're beginning to learn more and more now about black holes and the possibility of other dimensions, of parallel universes, and science is beginning to look into this, it's beginning to make more sense. And more people I'm talking to in the Bigfoot field around the country are beginning to ask the same question, like, why don't we have more physical evidence? Why don't we have a body by now? I keep an open mind to all possibilities, but there's so many things out there we just don't have the answers for.
Oh, I agree with that.
I do too. Well, anyway, guys, thanks for taking my call. Stan, thank you for answering my questions, and keep up the good work. I mean, you've been at this a long time, and I remember reading about you in John Green's book, Sasquatch Deeps Among Us. I know you were a correspondent for him for quite a while.
Yeah, I was going back to the 1970s.
Yep. All right, guys. Thanks for taking my call, and we'll talk
later.
later.
Thanks, Henry.
You know,
Billy,
yeah.
When you're in jail, you only get one phone call a month, and I really appreciate Henry using his free phone call to call the show.
That's a good one, Bruce.
That's really special.
Hey, Bruce, I didn't know they let you use Skype in prison.
Really, I'm telling you, they're living the life these days. You get sent away to the pen. You got cable TV, you got internet. Tell you what.
Well, that's good.
All right, later, guys.
Thanks, Henry.
See you later.
Hey, before this thing, hey Bruce, before this thing disappears off of my chat, because he asked it a long time ago.
Yeah.
MKB Squatch had asked about the Skinwalkers Ranch and about a fellow there that claims that I guess he's seen Bigfoot and UFOs together. Do you know anything about that, Stan?
Oh, yeah. Well, the Skinwalker Ranch is very interesting, and you know, you heard about this back several years ago when the book came out about it. And what was so fascinating is that it was very similar to many things I was writing about back in the 70s from all the investigations we were doing. And again, that's the point. It's not just something that's happened locally here, but the Skinwalker Ranch is just an example. There are numerous places, and a lot of people aren't aware of this, around the country, where you've got a localized paranormal phenomena, for a better term, ongoing year after year. And there may be certain areas, for whatever reason, that this is more active, even though it's sporadically reported in many places. And, I mean, you've got cases, for example, Ted Phillips, who was a very well-known UFO investigator, worked closely with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and was very, very, let's say, not open to the paranormal, especially when he's dealing with UFO sightings and, strange happenings and Bigfoot type stuff. But a few years ago, he got involved in an incident that he's still working on now out in, I believe it's Missouri, in a localized area there, which he spent a lot of time on a place very similar to the Skinwalker Ranch, where they're having all kind of UFO sightings, giant bird reports, Bigfoot activity, all kind of events, and he has apparently changed his mind and is becoming much more open-minded to the fact that, once again, there's many odd things going on out there we just don't understand. And I see more and more of this. Like I said, there's a lot of people in the UFO field that don't want to associate UFOs with Bigfoot, and, of course, there's many in the Bigfoot field that don't want to connect Bigfoot with UFOs. My position is I don't know what's going on out there. I was documenting these cases as they were occurring. I don't have the answers. But because we don't understand it, that doesn't mean we should, throw it under the bus and just pretend it didn't happen. I'm out there trying to encourage witnesses and other researchers that if you have these cases, bring them forth so people can learn more about it and we can study it. And from what I've gotten from multitudes of researchers throughout the country and around the world, there's a lot more to this than we know about, because so many researchers told me they have cases like that, but they're afraid of being ridiculed, so they're afraid to publish it. So I think there's probably a lot more data on this than we're really aware of.
You're probably right.
Stan, let me ask you a question. So there's of course, a long oral tradition of Bigfoot among the Native American and First Tribes people. Why do you think they don't really talk very much about Bigfoot coming from the sky?
Well, I haven't got that deeply involved in that. I know Eric's done a lot of research on the Native Americans, but I remember a lot of things I've read. I mean, there's references going back to at least the 1800s, and there are Native American, there's stories and traditions from different parts of the country where they've talked about these things, and I know a lot of the Native Americans feel that Bigfoot is something more spiritual in nature than physical, which maybe they know more than we understand, and that kind of fits in more with some of the information that I've been finding and others over past years.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at is that the Bigfoot UFO phenomenon seems to be fairly recent, relatively speaking, versus the long history we have of these creatures living in and being talked about, in oral tradition all over the world. So it seems to me that you're leaning more toward Bigfoot not being a flesh and blood creature. Am I right about that?
Well, I can only base this on some of the cases I've looked into over the years and the cases I'm familiar with around the country and around the world from many other researchers who have contacted me and told me similar type of events. When I spoke at the McMinnville UFO conference out in Oregon a few years ago, right in the middle of Bigfoot country, and I gave a presentation on this, and many of the key Bigfoot investigators in the area were there, and I expected I'd probably get a lot of negativism towards what I was saying, and in fact, it was completely opposite. Some of them met me personally, others contacted me later and said, you know what, we are so glad you brought this out, because we've come across the same things out here. Trails or tracks that suddenly stop and vanish. People shooting at them, they disappear. But everybody's afraid to talk about it publicly because they don't want to be ridiculed by their peers. So I hear this quite often, and when I feel that there's probably a lot more data on this out there, but for various reasons, a lot of the researchers are bringing this forth. And I'm hoping that in the future we'll hear more and more of this, and at least we can all try to figure out what's going on. I keep an open mind to all possibilities, until we have a physical body to study, then everybody will know probably for sure what's going on if that day ever comes. But again, I keep an open mind to all possibilities. I am definitely convinced that credible people do see these large, hairy creatures year after year. They cannot all be wrong, but there's many, many aspects of the mystery we don't have the answers for.
So is that a yes?
Well, what I'm saying is there's some evidence that some of these things may not be physical, and we didn't get into these cases. We didn't get the chance to talk about them. One case in particular was one that happened up in Fayette County in February of '74, just briefly, where a woman heard this commotion on her porch, thought it was some wild dogs, grabbed her shotgun, turned on the porch light, stepped out on the porch, and just a few feet in front of her is this huge 8-foot-tall hairy creature with his arms up over its head. She fires her shotgun right into it. There's this bright flash of light, and the creature suddenly just disappears right in front of her. And her in-laws hear the shot 100 feet away. The son-in-law grabs his pistol, starts making his way up towards the cabin, and he says 4 or 5 of these hairy people with eyes like coals of fire surrounded him. He starts shooting at them, went into the house, and here's this large glowing object hovering over the woods at the same time. And when the state police arrived at the scene sometime later, it got them a while, they got up in the mountains during that time, they were amazed at how these animals were reacting, these big vicious dogs that weren't even responding to them. And that's just one example of some of the cases we had that suggested that whatever we were dealing with was not a normal animal.
Yeah,
so I keep an open mind. Could there be something else involved? Yes. But, again, why don't we have any bodies by now? That still bothers me.
Right.
Well, Stan, this whole idea that Bigfoot is not a flesh and blood creature is a very popular one, especially now. We had Fred Sluga on the show a couple weeks ago, and but it seems like the evidence that most people are sort of throwing out there to suggest that these things aren't flesh and blood. It's more like the lack of evidence, just like you said. Footprints that all of a sudden they disappear, or these creatures disappear, but there isn't really, to say that these creatures, warp into another dimension. There's really not a lot of evidence to suggest that. All we can observe is, that
it's all, of course, it's all speculation. But again, we just barely began to talk about this aspect. It's not just the cases I have; it's numerous cases from around the country and around the world that go back to at least the 60s and the 70s, and so many people are unaware of them. And that's why I wrote the Silent Invasion book, which people can get through Amazon, Silent Invasion, Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook, which gets into a lot of these cases in much more detail. And it's just amazing some of the things we've come across. And, again, I've never seen one. I've interviewed thousands of people with UFOs, hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses. Everybody can't be wrong, but there's so many questions out there, and we have so little answers to some of these mysteries.
I agree. There's a lot of questions out there, Stan. And the thing is, about these dimensions, we've proven mathematically that extra dimensions exist, right? What isn't so apparent is, how you travel between them.
Exactly. Well, going back when I started in this, back watching these old TV shows before you were even born, Science Fiction Theater and The Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, and so much of those stories that we used to laugh at about all the things they talked about and how many of those things and all the progress in science since that time that has become a reality. So what we're just talking about now, maybe 20 years from now, might be a reality, and we'll learn a lot more about these subjects that we're just beginning to touch on.
Well, before we go off live, we've got a couple more minutes before we go off live. I just wanted to tell everybody out in the chat room and listening live online, thanks for tuning into the show. We're going to continue a little bit into the archives, so if you want to hear some of the other answers, because I've got a question from Flycatch that I'm going to ask Stan, and he can answer in the archives, because I think it's an interesting question. But I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Tune into the archives, because probably tonight me and Bruce may have some final words of wisdom tonight. But before we go to that, anyway, Flycatch wanted me to ask you, Stan, if you are familiar with ley lines passing through the state of Pennsylvania.
I've really not got into that too much. I mean, we looked into, I believe he's talking about lines of energy. I think that's what he's probably referring to. And, for example, along the Chestnut Ridge, we were looking into various things for years over in those areas and try to figure out why there was so much activity. I mean, there's a earthquake fault that goes through there, which, of course, has not been active, but we never could find anything that I can think of offhand that would suggest anything significant up in that area. However, there's a lot of areas around the state. And one thing we did find that I talk about in my writings that there's a lot of sightings around energy sources with Bigfoot and UFOs. Railroad tracks, water reservoirs, lakes, high-tension power lines. There's various types of sources of energy, and that commonly comes up in so many of the cases we investigate.
Okay.
So,
all right,
Stan,
Bruce, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Billy. Did you have to?
No, go ahead. Something? Go ahead and ask your question. I'm typing into the letting some folks didn't know that there was an archive.
Oh, okay. So, Stan, if let's say these creatures are flesh and blood, let's say that you accept that premise, do you think the creatures are more of a sort of missing link, like an Australopithecus type of creature, or do you think that they're more human? So because there's been some studies that seem to suggest that, Bigfoot DNA contains some human DNA in it. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, again, there's so many things I just don't have the answers for. It's bad they're gathering the data on these type of things. And my feeling is that, some of these cases, the incidents seem to suggest more man-like, in some cases more ape-like creatures. There seem to be intelligent, or there's intelligence behind them. And again, I'm convinced beyond any doubt there is something out there. People are seeing them year after year. But I haven't seen any evidence that really has made me feel that Gigantopithecus is the source of what we're dealing with, for example.
Okay. So that's your final answer?
Yeah. My final answer is I know there's something going on out there. People see them year after year, but we need a lot more data. And again, if you have to look at so much, and there's so much out there that a lot of people aren't aware of. So it's really hard for me to try to focus on one area because there's so many other areas that I'm aware of, and some people may or may not be. And so it's very difficult to try to feel like exactly what we're dealing with. I don't have the answers. There's something out there, and we still don't know what it is.
Yeah. That's the way to sum it up.
Well, there's certainly a lot more work that has to be done, and, thanks to people like Stan who are, they do the laborious, drudgery of the following up with the reports. And, I think, people, who do that, people like Stan, make a huge contribution to the field. And I really applaud Stan's efforts and all his work over the years, following up with these reports and, creating a base of knowledge that wouldn't exist were it not for his efforts.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And like I said, reports come in here pretty much regularly. And I try to get the reports. A lot of the reports I will put on my website, which is stangordon.info, I-N-F-O. So your listeners can keep checking that for some of the more current information on what's going on.
Yep, and you got a lot of stuff on your website because I checked it out.
Yeah. Did anyone ever identify that animal in the photo, Stan, on your website?
No, I've had some theories on it, and then I've been getting reports. I know others have been getting reports of something similar. I mean, some of these people who have been doing research on the Internet, they're connecting it with the American version of the chupacabra, which is not the typical chupacabra of South America with the spiny back and attacking the sheep. The one here in the United States, some people feel some type of hybrid between possibly like a dog and a coyote, or there's different theories on it out there. So I have different people who have been contacting me, and some of the theories are that, well, it's a fox or it's a coyote with mange, so who knows? It's just a possibility.
It does, in my opinion. It does, in my opinion, look. I don't know why, because there's really not a lot of it showing in the picture, but I get the impression from what I'm looking at that it is sort of canine in nature.
Yeah, the thing that's odd, though, which the witness mentioned, was the fact that it had that very long snout, which they thought was very unusual, and it did have a dog-like face to it.
Yep. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Stan, I appreciate you coming on the show. I really do. I think that, and I know that everyone enjoyed the show tonight. We got more. I have to say, Stan, we got more compliments on tonight's show. I think, Bruce. I mean, you saw it in the chat room than we have just about any show.
Well, I appreciate that. It's very nice.
Yeah, we did get a lot of we did a lot of great comments, good feedback tonight.
They all also said that you have really good lung capacity.
Yeah,
I've been doing this for quite a while.
Stan, do you keep like a canister of oxygen next to your desk?
I can't give all my secrets away.
You might want to take a couple huffs of that.
That's it. We'll go for that next time.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Stan. We do appreciate it. We'll have to have you on the show again because I know you got probably enough stories to do 20 more shows.
Oh, yeah. There's always new information, and, yep, I'll be glad to come back again.
Stan's got a lot of interesting stories, definitely.
Yep. And Janine told me to tell Stan and his wife hello.
And the same from us.
All right. Same from them. All right. Thank you, Stan.
All right, guys. Well, listen, have a good evening.
All right.
All right.
You too.
Thanks, Stan.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
All right, Bruce. I guess that wraps up another show.
Yep, another great show, Billy.
That's right. And I guess before we sign off tonight, we may have some words of wisdom.
Well, I always look forward to your thoughts of the day, Billy.
Well, it's been an interesting week, to say the least. Obviously, there's been everything from more hoaxes being busted, more letdowns in the community, people believing people that have lied 2 to 3 times before. It's really funny. I'm not going to name the person because he doesn't deserve any more publicity. But anyone who believed the guy again, you get what you deserve. I just can't say anything more than that. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I said from the beginning, once it was all the rumor started again, that he had everything from a dead body, and then it turned to a live Bigfoot to, like, good Lord. And people fall for it.
Yeah.
I just don't get it. It's
a shame. It's a shame, Billy, because, people like that really detract from the real research, of dedicated people, trying to get to the bottom of this mystery. And it's really just a blight on the whole field, really.
Right.
And, who knows what their motivation is for doing it. They just want their 15 minutes, of fame. I know that it can be addictive for some people. But really, you think people would know better by now. And I'm not talking about the individual who is making the claims, but the people who actually believe them.
Yeah, it really is. It's just, it doesn't make any sense, and there's no explanation for it. So it's just, crazy stuff. And and then of course you have the famous bloggers. These bloggers just love to put out their their information, their well-educated information.
Well, here's the thing about these anonymous bloggers, Billy. The information they put out is usually wrong. There's usually very little truthful fact in what they put out. And so, I think people who are in the know that these people are full of crap. But, there's no reason for it except that they are just trying to cause trouble. And again, another blight on the field. And so that's the reason why, the field of Bigfooting gets a bad name, because you have hoaxers, you have people with, and this is the truth, people who are negative, like those anonymous bloggers.
Yep.
They have low self-esteem.
Right.
And the only way they can, feel better about themselves is pulling other people down.
Right.
It's a shame.
Well,
it's a real shame.
Well, let's face it. I mean, we can name off a few very unfactual statements that are in these blogs.
Right.
One of the biggest non-factual things that I've seen in the blogs is the accusations of researchers making money presenting at conferences. Well, obviously I'm doing something wrong, Bruce. I might need your help or something because I can't recall making a dime off of any conference. Now, granted, I have had, the folks that put them together, give me money for gas or, pay for my food, pay for my board. Okay, that's one thing. But financially, I'm not making a profit off of speaking at a conference. And one of the other unfactual statements, is they like to say that these conference organizers make money, that they profit from the conferences. Well, it is very obvious that, these organizers must obviously be doing something wrong because, I know people who have organized these events. I'm close with people that have organized these events. And I'm telling you, the math doesn't add up. And
No.
so the argument would be, well, so if you're not doing a conference for monetary gain, then why do you do it? How hard is it for some people to understand that some people do these conferences because they enjoy it? They enjoy it. They may take a loss, but they enjoy doing it. They enjoy making friends. They enjoy seeing smiles on kids' faces when they hear a story. How hard is that for people to understand?
Well, Billy, I mean, look at the people you're talking about. You're talking about people who would never understand because they don't do anything for other people. They only care about themselves. And because they only care about themselves, they can't get out of that mindset of, a common good or, trying to help other people or trying to introduce them into the field. And so, their world, their very small world is what's in it for me. So a person like that will never understand the joy of putting on a conference, being with friends, working toward a common good, and just really enjoying the camaraderie that comes with good friends and good friendships, long-standing friendships. Those people will never understand, Billy. And so, they dig around. Oh, geez, why are they doing? Oh, they must be making money. They're only doing it for money.
Right.
And I'm not denying that there are unscrupulous people who do things for money. Like I know a certain group that charges people $400 a head to take them out into like a public park to look for Bigfoot.
Yep.
Hey, more power to them. But my personal philosophy is that it's a public park, and we've organized many events, Billy, over the last couple of years, and we never charged for them. We've taken people out in the woods. We've organized workshops. We've showed people how to, cast tracks and collect evidence and evaluate evidence. And we never charge for that stuff because we come from a very different mindset than other people. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else or anything, but the point is that if you're in it, and all you're in it is for, just about yourself, that's all you're in it for, you're not going to understand. You're just not. You're not going to understand, like, what it is to have a labor of love that you enjoy doing, even though, it doesn't make you money or which is very often the case, you lose money.
Right. Right.
Very sad.
And not only that, the other thing that makes it easier for them to spout off their negative comments is because they remain anonymous, and it's very easy to have an anonymous name and be spouting out unfactual information, mainly because they know that people will know who they are, and it won't be very friendly for them when people figure out who they are, and they know who's giving out the unfactual information, so they hide behind an anonymous name.
Well, Billy, if you're causing trouble like these anonymous bloggers do, right? This is the reason why they do it. They're causing trouble. You're not going to put your name out there. You're going to say, well, I'm practicing my First Amendment right. Well, the First Amendment, guarantees your freedom of speech, but it doesn't mean that you have the right to slander other people, and it also doesn't mean that you have the right to say things that are not factual. So I think people sort of, again, someone who has low self-esteem, like the anonymous bloggers, they won't get it, and they'll never get it.
Right.
And my only hope is that there are enough incredible researchers out there and people who see them for what they are and realize, like, hey, these people are just low self-esteem underachievers.
Right. Right. And let's face it, we can sit here and we can speculate as to the reasonings behind what they do. But in all honesty, they pick on a chosen few people in this field. And we know there's a reason that they pick on a chosen few people in this field. And it's typically those who are very outspoken, those that share information. And we can speculate, why? Why do we think they do that? Well, we all know that jealousy can cause a big factor in it. If you're jealous of a person and you want what they have, or you want to be invited to speak at a conference or what have you, what better way than to attack that person that you're jealous of?
Yeah.
So, anyway, well, I think but we'll leave it on a positive note. The majority of that was probably negative, but to leave things on a positive note, those of us who are true researchers, those who don't sit behind a keyboard all day long and type up blogs, the ones that actually get out into the woods and do some research. The positive note of the day is we're going to keep continuing to do what we do, regardless of what you write. So, positive note is, folks, if you enjoy what you're doing, keep doing it. Get out there, make friends, go to the conferences, make new friends, go out in the woods, have a great time. That's what it's all about.
Amen, Billy. I totally agree with you on that.
All right, and so everyone tune in next Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm sure we're going to have another show. I think we're going to have another topic show, ain't we, Bruce?
Yes, next Tuesday is going to be Topic Tuesday, so we're going to have a topic show, and those are always very popular and spirited, to say the least. Yep,
and you'll have to everybody be paying real close attention to your Facebook groups, as we will be advertising what that topic will be sometime over the weekend. And while we're talking about Facebook groups, I always like to mention a couple of the groups because they do allow us to advertise on their group pages. So I would like to say a big thank you to Bigfoot Wars. And by the way, anyone can put this into the search bars on Facebook and find their groups and try to join the group and see what's going on. But Bigfoot Wars is one of the groups that lets us advertise, as well as the Ohio Bigfoot Hunters page, which of course is part of Tim Stover that we had on I believe it was last week.
Yes, that's a good guy.
So thanks you guys for letting us continue to advertise on your group pages, and I think we'll call it a night, Bruce.
Great show, Billy. Thanks again.
All right, thank you, Bruce, and we'll see everybody next Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Sasquatch Watch Radio. Remember to join us again next Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. We appreciate every one of our listeners. Thank you so much for being here.